Welcome to another episode of Behind the Now. Today I chat with the brilliant, award-winning author, John David Mann. Before becoming a full-time writer, John succeeded in several fields, including co-founding a high school at just 17 years old and becoming a concert cellist and prize-winning composer. John has published over 30 books, including the best-selling series The Go-Giver, The Latte Factor, and a book about writing titled How to Write Good, or at least gooder. Some of John's many awards include the Axiom Business Book Award, the Nautilus Award, and Taiwan's Golden Book Award for Innovation. Additionally, his most recent novel, Steal Fear, was named one of Publisher Weekly's best books of 2021. Listen in to be inspired by John's unique background and to learn lots of creative gems regarding the writing process and mindset. Hi, John. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Well, it's my pleasure. Me too.
Thank you. So you are a New York Times bestselling author. You have written over 30 books. It's amazing everything that you've done. So I just want to first ask you, how did you get to where you are today? Like, did you always want to be an author growing up? How did you ever get into writing? I know you have a very cool background. You are a composer, a cellist, but I'll let you talk over it.
Yeah, no, I did not. I never sat down and said, I want to be an author. I read a lot of writers talk about how they wanted to write books since they were a kid. And I admire that so much. It's not me.
Yeah.
I've kind of pinballed around, as you have probably already seen. I started out in classical music. I was a cellist and a composer, and my dad was a choral conductor. My mom was an educator, and I got very interested in education in my teens. I was already kind of launching a career as a composer. I dropped out of high school, and some friends and I started our own high school, and that was sort of my first. I didn't call it this then, but that was my first experience in being an entrepreneur, I guess. I started this high school. It was very successful and ran on for a decade. And we had students go on to Harvard and Yale and all kinds of fun things. And then I got very interested in nutrition and natural health. And I was in that career for some years, which kind of led me into sales and the whole world of superfoods and direct selling and so forth. And I got involved in that world for a while. And everything I did, I always seemed to be the guy who was editing the article or the brochure or the newsletter or what have you. I kind of fell into editing as I didn't think of it as a career, but that's what it kind of became. I spent over a decade really as a professional editor for a variety of business journals. And that's how I got into writing. I kind of backed into writing. I had this plan to be a Hollywood screenwriter. That was a plan. I did sit down and say, I want to do this. It didn't happen. That was my plan.
Would you still want to do that with screenwriting?
Yes and no. I did for a while. I mean, I wrote some screenplays. I went out to Hollywood. I took some great classes. I had a fantastic teacher in Hollywood, and I studied screenwriting like crazy. But while I was doing that, this friend of mine, Bob Berg, approached me. I knew I'd edited some stuff of his. He approached me and he said he wanted to co-write a book with me, and that book ended up being my first book that went big. That was was substantial. And so, like I said, Bob Berg ruined my career because screenwriting was gone. So I've been writing books ever since.
Wow. So it really organically developed. I feel like it really did. You kind of followed your joy, it sounds like, overall, and then it kind of led you to where you needed to be. Yeah.
Really, very much. My joy and just my fascinations. Like I've always been.
Curiosity. Yeah. I love that. I want to ask you, because I'm very interested in the education system. Like that's always been a passion of mine, not how it is, but changes that could be made. And I actually wrote a screenplay that really addresses that, which is interesting. I kind of wanted to, when you were 17, what made you want to start your own high school? What was the thought process behind that?
So a lot of friends of mine and I had gone to a grade school, to a middle school that was small, kind of quirky, arts focused private school. Now, when I say private school, you get this idea of, rich kids. It wasn't all rich kids. It was, it was a very artsy, we would call it today funky, or, they didn't call it funky back then. That's what it was. And my mom taught there, and she was a playwright. She would, she wrote plays, and she would do Shakespeare with, 10-year-olds and stuff. So it was a really cool environment. And I had a friend there who was my cello teacher, also 2 years older than I was. And he ended up being the cellist of the Emerson String Quartet. Like one of the, so really great things came out of that school. But by this time, that only went to 9th grade. So we were all had dispersed. We were all, the diaspora. We were all in our own town's local public high schools. And I was just bored out of my mind. The school was just boring. I felt like I was in some kind of institutional assembly line, and it just there was so much that I wanted to learn, and this isn't just me, all my friends. There's so much we wanted to learn, and we felt like school was like getting in the way. Was it Mark Twain? Was it Mark Twain who said, "Never let schooling interfere with your education"? Yeah, and that's how it felt. So what we wanted was we started saying, what would it be like if we had a school where we could learn what we wanted to learn, where we could pursue our interests and our passions and our fascinations, and without limit. And that's what we did.
Wow. Oh, I love that. So you and a few of your friends like made this school?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
How was the process for that? Like physically getting a building? Like, how did you know what to do?
We didn't know what to do. First of all, we did not know. So it was my junior year of high school. That's when I dropped out. I dropped out beginning of my junior year.
Okay.
That's in the fall of that year. My friends and I started talking about this. I was the only one who dropped out and did this full time.
I see.
So I kind of spearheaded the group. I spent the rest of that year through the summer. So like the next 10 months or so, creating the school. One of the first things we did was we decided we needed a grown-up to do things that we didn't know how to do, like get money and, like you said, get a building, and like, how do you do this?
Right.
So we interviewed a number of people who all had interesting backgrounds in education, people that our parents knew, connections of, we networked basically.
Right. Good.
And we found a bunch of fascinating candidates. And we ended up hiring, I say hiring, like we had the power to hire, right? We hired a guy named Julian F. Thompson, who's gone now. But Julian was a wonderful novelist. He wrote a book called The Grounding of Group 6, which is about a group of wealthy kids whose parents send them off to some kind of camp. And it turns out that the parents have sent them there to be murdered. It's a great book. A YA book. Anyway, so Julian became our director, and he and us, we created it. We got everything on a shoestring, everything on a volunteer basis. The building was a loan from the local ethical society. It was just a really funky, ramshackle, but excellent experience.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. It sounds like you had have amazing parents too, to foster that. That's, 'cause not many parents
gotta credit my parents.
That.
Credit my parents. They heard what we were doing and said, yeah, keep talking, do that, which is, if that hadn't been true, it couldn't have possibly happened.
Yes. Wow. That's really amazing. Okay. And so during that time you were playing the cello. Where did you grow up, by the way? Where was this?
New Jersey.
Okay. New Jersey.
Yeah,
cool.
Central New Jersey. Yep.
All right. And so you're a musician. Okay. I see. And then you went into editing and then became a writer. So I want to talk a little bit about your writing process. Before we get into that, actually, how do you know when to have so it sounds like for you, having a co-writer, Bob Berg, for The Go-Giver kind of naturally fell into place. But how do you know in general as a writer when to pursue a co-writer and when you'll be a good match and when not to? What's your experience with that so far? Because I know you've done both now.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question too, because this is one more time. This is something that I didn't plan out,
right?
But it just kind of sort of seemed to evolve out of circumstance. So out of those 30 plus books, almost all have been co-authorships.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everything I've written, I've written with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that has been pragmatic. In some cases, I was writing somebody else's memoirs, serving
Right.
basically
That
as
makes
a
sense.
ghostwriter in a
Uh-huh.
sense. In some cases, like with Bob, um, the other person had an idea for a book, but didn't have the chops to
Mm.
to do the writing, to take it from idea to an
Yes.
entire
Yeah.
story. So it was, and it also in many cases, and this is where the pragmatic part comes in. I don't have a huge, I didn't have a huge marketing background, a huge marketing skill set. I didn't have a big social media platform when such a thing began to exist.
Mm.
And I've partnered in many cases with co-authors who kind of handle the marketing part.
I see. Yeah.
A lot of people who aren't in publishing don't realize that when you write a book, it isn't like you write the book, give it to the publisher, and they promote it.
Right.
Yeah, it's not like that. It's like the publisher will get the book into distribution, into bookstores, but it's the author bears a large part of the responsibility for getting the book out in the world, building the buzz, getting word of mouth out.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was I would partner with a co-author who would kind of handle the marketing part. It's like Bob sat me down and said, make you a deal. You write the book, I'll market the book. I was like, okay, that sounds good to me. So it isn't like Bob didn't write any of it. And it isn't like I didn't do any marketing. It's not, that black and white, but that was kind of those were kind of our areas. And Bob has been an amazing partner since The Go-Giver, audiovisual aid, The Go-Giver.
Yes, perfect.
We sold over 1 million copies.
Amazing.
And since then, there have been a series. It's a parable. It's a story that illustrates the principles. And there have been a series of sequels. So there's now 4 or 5 Go-Giver books. My wife and I are coming out with another one. We just co-wrote.
Oh, yeah? That's so
next
cool.
year. Yeah, Go-Giver Marriage. So I've done a lot of those with Bob. I've also co-authored about 6 books with Brandon Webb, the Navy SEAL, which is what all this background is about. And, in both cases, and I've co-authored a lot of books with people who had really interesting life stories. And so I told their story, my writing, their story. That's a little bit like being the actor in a biopic. It's like being Rami Malek and playing Freddie Mercury.
Right.
It's like, so, and then you asked about how you pick that.
So I see how for you it kind of just made sense in every case there was some reason, so that makes sense. And then what about just like the work ethic of writing with someone, like when you guys have conflicts, right? Like you see it like this, someone sees it like this, and like how do you sort that out? How do you get through it? How do you not sometimes take too long brainstorming things also where it's like there's no progress? What are your experiences with that?
There have been some projects that sounded really interesting in many ways or sounded really commercially viable that I've said, nah. And because it just didn't feel like a fit.
Right.
It didn't feel like the person and I were going to be a fit, or the subject and I were going to be a fit. So I don't think I really want to write that book.
Right.
Like if they had brought me in to write OJ's If I Did It, I wouldn't have written it. It's just like, I'm sorry, I don't want to be the guy that wrote that book. It's not what I want to do. So that was kind of an extreme example I just gave there. But there have also been projects where I got in, where I started, and it after a while, it just became apparent that it wasn't working.
I see. Okay. Yeah, so sometimes it is that trial and error, and you have to let it go.
I've gotten a lot better over sussing something out from the start and saying, this is going to work, it's not going to work. And in the books that I've done, the partners that I've had, the co-authors I've had, you ask, what do you do when you have a conflict? I hate to say we don't. I mean, we really don't.
Wow.
And again, I do most of the writing. It's not in there. There are co-authorships, there are partnerships in writing where they really share the writing.
Oh, I see.
In mine, it's like I do most of the writing.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So like we all have our jobs to do. We all have our areas.
So that makes sense. That makes complete sense. I'm like, I sometimes think of it as like meeting together and like, okay, what are we writing? But you guys meet,
yeah.
but it's like you go off and write.
That's like the writing room on a TV show, right? You get
Right,
six guys in a room and say, okay.
Yeah.
Now my wife and I just did that, but we have practice, working together.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure.
And that worked out beautifully. We wrote a book just now where I wrote most of the first half and she wrote most of the back half, and then and that worked out really, really well. But in most cases, how it works, Jenna, is this: to do a book project, there are kind of like three phases. The first phase, I'm talking with the person. I'm maybe if they have, if they're a public speaker, I watch some of their talks. I get them on video or whatever, and I read the transcripts. I just kind of absorb their material. We may talk on the phone, a couple of dozen times. That's the gathering phase. I just learn everything I need to learn, kind of suck up the material. Then there's the writing part, the drafting part, which I close my door, close my windows, and it's just me, and I just draft. And I don't really consult. That's a solo activity. Then once I got a draft, I open it back up again, and now we're in dialogue. And maybe they'll say, "Hey, what about if you did this differently or you did that?" And we go back and forth. So there is input, but the heavy lifting of churning out 50,000 words or 100,000 words, I do that solo.
Right. It's okay. That makes sense. I'm glad you broke that down. I could see that now. I'm like, oh, okay. That totally makes sense. So what made you write? You wrote, so this book you wrote completely on your own and is currently online, How to Write Good, or at least gooder, right? What made you write that? Because I've started it. It's extremely informative. Yes, it's really amazing.
Good for you. Far out.
There's such gold in it. And what made you want to, what made you want to give back? It's like giving back, really, because you are breaking down like writing secrets. What made you want to write that? And how long did that take for you? Was that like an easy thing to write, or? Yeah,
it was really an interesting experience. I call that my love letter to my readers. I started out, mostly when I do podcasts or interviews or shows or things, we're talking about the content of a book. We're talking about the subject matter of the book. But every now and then I would get a question about, so the writing process. What was it like to write that? How did you do this? How did you make this decision? How did you come up with that character? What were the challenges? And I'd hear myself answer a question and go, oh, I didn't know I knew that, or I didn't know I thought that. And Joan Didion once said, I write to find out what I think.
Yes.
Right?
And sometimes you wrote that in there, right?
Yeah. Sometimes we talk, we speak to find, and we discover that we just said things we didn't even know we knew. So I would say, I should write that down. And I started writing those things down. I started collecting a set of just notes and scribbles on the writing process. And a year ago or so, I said, I should put that together in like a little article or like a little ebook or something. And once I sat down to start to write it, it grew, and it's it's a full-size book.
Yes, it is. It is.
I will probably publish that eventually as a real book. With covers and everything on Amazon. But right now, it's, as you say, it's a download. It's a free download on my site. It's and I just did it exclusively for now for my readers, people who go to my site. It's my effort to do two things. For people who want to write, and I don't mean who want to be published writers or write books, but write anything, write. Blog posts, articles, op-eds, newsletters, whatever, brochures. People who want to write, just my effort to help people do that better. But the other thing is to kind of be a cheerleader and support system. I mean, I've gotten so much out of listening to other writers, particularly famous writers, talk about their process on Zoom interviews or, in book signings, it's bookstores or what have you. And I talked about this in the very beginning of the book, Dennis Lehane, right? I went to hear Dennis Lehane one day at a public library near our house, and it just changed my life.
Right. It validated that your process was normal to some extent, like not knowing what you're doing when you start a project, right?
Yes, exactly. He started talking about what it felt like on the inside, and I was like, oh my God, it's like that for me. So, I just want to give that same experience to other people and help. If I can help people, shortcut a couple of years of trial and error and shortcut some pain and angst and suffering, and get into their own writing flow more quickly and more productively and more satisfyingly, then I'll be thrilled.
Yeah, I love that. So like the nitty gritty, do you normally start with, I suppose it depends what you're writing, so you can go for each thing, but like, do you normally start with structure and outline, or do you kind of spill stuff out and then you see the story? Like,
See,
what's your process like?
That's a funny thing, because I'm a very outline oriented guy. I'm a very structured guy. And part of that is I still kind of think like a composer. So I'm thinking like a book is like a symphony for me. I'm thinking about how, theme in the beginning comes back at the end of the last movement. And so I think like in arcs and structures. I'm very much of a structure guy, but that's not how I start. How I start is never with an outline. How I start is with whatever sparks. Like, for example, I'm writing right now, the book Steal Fear, which you can see here on the screen.
You're writing the second one, right?
I'm writing the second one, exactly. Right. So this one is just came out a month ago, and I'm almost finished with the manuscript of the second one. The second one, all I knew to start with was I had a location, which was Iceland. Second one happens in Iceland. And then I just had this idea that a girl drowns. And because my hero, Finn, the Navy SEAL, like water is his whole life. He's like, water is like a superpower. He loves the water. So all he drinks is water. His water is like his theme. And I had this idea, came to me, what would it feel like to actually drown? I've never drowned. I hope I never do. But I was just like, wow, that would be a terrifying experience. And so I just had this picture of this young woman drowning. And I had no idea what it meant. And I thought, where would she drown in the middle of Iceland? And so I started looking at maps of Reykjavik. And right in the middle of Reykjavik, there's this little lake right in the middle of downtown. I thought, that's where she drowns in the middle of winter. But wait, it's icy. I researched some more and I found out that they keep a corner of the lake thawed for ducks all through the winter.
Wow.
So she goes in that corner and drowns. Why does she do that? I have no idea. So that's sometimes you just have this thing and say, what does that mean? I do not know.
Yeah. And then you go with that.
Whole book came out of that.
That's amazing. Yeah. So that leads me to, how do you know when an idea is worth pursuing? I think it's just something like you can't forget it, right? Like it's just building in you. Is that
it's like if it catches at you, if it catches at you. And I've had ideas that I've pursued and then I didn't really know where to go with it. And it's not. And by the way, it's the same thing when you're writing nonfiction. If you're writing, let's just say, for example, you're writing a memoir, or you're not writing a memoir, you're writing an article about somebody. It's kind of like a small memoir, right? You're writing someone's life story. Okay, so that's not fiction. That happened. That's a real person. And all this stuff really happened. Your only job is to write it down. But you are not a tape recorder. It's not like, just write down what happened. Your job as a writer, you still have to figure out, what's the story here?
Right.
Like, where does it start? Where does it end? What's the arc? What does it mean? What are the high points? What's the big challenge? And it's like, what is the story of this person's life? Because the person often doesn't know. Like they know they've had all these experiences, but a story has a structure. It has a form. It's like, it's got act 1, act 2, act 3, right?
Right. And I feel like a memoir, you have this person who has like almost like an A story, a B story, a C, like a bunch of different storylines. And it's like, which one are you focusing on, or which couple, right? That's interesting.
Exactly.
I never thought about that.
Exactly. So sometimes you pursue a line or an idea, and after a while, you realize, this is not actually going anywhere that seems too interesting. So a lot of it is trial and error, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But it's whatever really catches your interest is where you start. So that's why, for me, I don't start with an outline. I start with just ideas and say, how might this happen? Where does this go from there? And after a little while, and start getting a couple of pages of notes and thoughts and ideas, it's like, okay, now I need an outline because I need some boxes to start to organize this thought. What's the chronology? What's the sequence? And for me, the most important thing is an outline is malleable. It's always shifting, changing, moving.
Mm.
So I write stuff and then I outline, and then I take the outline, suggest more stuff, and then I write more stuff, and then I go back to the outline.
Mm-hmm.
It's like right brain and left brain
I'm
going
like
back
that.
and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's natural, isn't
Definitely.
it? It's a
First,
rhythm.
yeah. And like that first thing you kind of sometimes, at least for me, I've tried to start writing too quickly, I realize. And it's like you actually need to let that marinate a bit longer to kind of like organically fill it out. And then still I'll sometimes start and still it's like, no, I don't know what I'm doing. Because there'll be like these gaps and things, and it's like, I don't know. Yeah.
It's this interesting
thing.
It is. It's a delicate balance of, it's like, for me, when I'm going to sit down and write something, I need to, it's like you're taking something that doesn't exist and you're trying to put it into words in a page, right? So it's a little bit like trying to catch smoke.
Right.
And for me, the balance is I need to focus it, but if I push it and focus it too hard, I kind of lose what it is. So it's like, when do you sit around and just kind of go, and play with thoughts? And when do you say, okay, time to get organized? And, and it's a delicate balance. You can't force it, right?
Yes. You explained that so beautifully. That's
good.
Exactly it. That's so interesting. So
a lot of it for me is learning how to be kind to myself.
Yes, that's a good
and know, okay, I may be frustrated. I may feel like I'm not doing a good job right now, but it's not that I'm not doing a good job. This is hard work. I'm like, it's like trying to get on a wild horse and ride it. And so it's like, be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, but just stay on it. Don't let it fuck you off.
Exactly. Do you ever, so what do you tend to do when you hit like writer's block or like when you're just stuck? What do you do personally?
For me, it's been a process of kind of learning how it feels, because there are sort of different kinds of blocks to me, different kinds of brick walls. Sometimes what's happening is I can't make this story work. Something is like not working here. And I can't make this, say, chapter or this scene like fit, and I'm frustrated with it. And what it is there's a bigger question that I haven't asked. Like, what is the character doing right now? What is it that they're trying to find? Or what is it that, what is the larger question that's going on? And maybe I have to back up and take a look at the sort of the whole storyline. Sometimes when I'm frustrated with a scene or with a point in the story, I will back up and say, okay, let's do a brand new, fresh outline, just on a single page of this main character or this secondary character through the whole story, how they change, where they change, how do they change, and just see, like, where am I with this character right now? I can't write this scene because I don't know what's going on for this character because I haven't actually thought it through. But sometimes it's a question of just looking at it from a different angle and backing off a bit. Sometimes my brain is just tired and I need to just put it down and go read. And I'll go read, like, the latest novel I just picked up or whatever. Just to kind of air out the brain and feed the furnace, to use two different metaphors at the same time.
Yes, you explain in your book, you explain reading and writing as like inhaling and exhaling, which made so much sense. And not just for writing, for kind of any creativity, there's that, like the second you're too focused on just the art, whatever it is, like, you need that inspiration as well, like the ideas, the imagination, and that comes from like everything else, that was really
I'm very careful what I read when I'm writing, because I don't want to write exactly imitate the style of the author I'm reading right now. But I know that my writing is going to be influenced. So sometimes I say, well, who do I want to be influenced while I'm writing this particular book? I want to be influenced by, by Jack Reacher, or do I want to be influenced by, so, and I read less when I'm in the thick of writing, but I can't stop altogether, because then it's like, as you say, I have no oxygen. Something else that happens for me is sometimes I just have to get out of my office, out of my room. I'll be like stuck. I've worked for 45 minutes on something and I'm kind of stuck and I don't know. And I just take my dog for a walk. And the moment I'm like half a block away, my brain starts going, get all these ideas. I go, oh, right. The outside world, oxygen. And Sometimes it's just, you get too cramped in your
Yeah,
own
it's
concentration.
I love all of that. I've experienced all of that to like degrees, I'm like, oh yes.
Yeah.
Um, there's have you heard Elizabeth Gilbert talk about, she has a TED talk about creativity.
I
It's
haven't.
just
I've been told I need to hear this.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh really?
Yeah.
It's from a while ago, but it just what you're saying reminds me of it. Like just
Yeah.
creativity in general, how there's like yeah, it's very interesting. She talks about how you should change your whole everyone should, how we
Yeah.
think of like creativity, not from coming from the human, but like from as we're more like vessels. And when you
Yeah.
say everything you're saying, it kind of just makes sense with that too.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I have, Jenna, I've got two. I talked about the right brain, left brain. That was two
Mhm.
processes of just letting sparks go versus being structured. I've actually got two different locations in my office. I'm looking at them right now. I've
Mhm.
got a place at my desk where I'm sitting right now with my computer is, and it's kind of where I organize
Uh-huh.
with my fingers. And then I've got a comfy chair over in the corner where my computer never goes there.
Mm.
It's just me and a pad of paper and a pen and a cup of tea. And that's where I start out every day. I start out there at 5:30 in the morning or so with a blank pad of paper. And I don't think in structure. I just kind of like, I
Uh-huh.
sit there and say, well, now what's on the menu today? I don't know. And it feels exactly like you're describing. Like I'm going to sit here and just open up my brain and
Mm.
say, okay, pour in whatever you want to pour in. And I may have a chapter draft from yesterday that I'm actually working on. So I actually have something on my side table there,
Mhm.
but I don't sit down and start going, okay, I'm going to edit this and edit this. Put it down. It's almost like putting it down, like you putting it on an altar, like
Uh,
you're offering it up, and kind of sit back and go, okay, opening up the brain,
uh-huh.
pour in, and I may sit there for 15 minutes and nothing happens, and that is okay,
Mm.
because that's the time of just being open to unexpected thoughts.
Yeah. I love that. And that's the same with what you said, like taking your dog for a walk, all of that stuff sometimes
Yes,
opens that pathway.
yes.
Yeah. So
Although I wonder if my
interesting.
dog is communicating with me telepathically, and he's really writing the book. I'm not sure. That's
Oh my
possible.
gosh. What kind of dog do you have?
We have a mini poodle,
Okay. Oh, so
uh,
cute.
and he's named Finn after the hero of my book. And
Oh,
I
wow.
think his IQ, which has not been measured, must be about the same as the combined IQs of myself and my wife. It's my guess.
Wow.
It's very
That's
smart.
cute. I was just curious. So now you're writing novels. How
Yes.
does that process? First, what made you decide to write a novel? Because it's very different than your other books. And then yes,
Yeah.
yeah. What made you decide to do that? And then what's the process? How does the process differ for that?
Yes. Like most good things in my life, it wasn't my idea.
Right.
um, I just I just responded to it.
Uh-huh.
All of the greatest things in my life were things that I just said yes to when they came
Yes.
along.
That's
Um, and when I first started talking with Brandon Webb, we wrote his memoir, which is called The Red Circle. That was a New York Times bestseller. And that was a
mm,
really exciting project back in a decade ago plus. And that was his story of growing up and child of two Canadian hippies and becoming a
mm.
Navy SEAL sniper, which is an
Wow.
unexpected
Amazing.
life path. Um, and we really clicked as a partnership. And one of our very first phone calls, he said, "Would you ever be interested in working on a novel or a thriller? Because the story is not based on, but it's inspired by a real event, a series of
Mm,
real events that he witnessed during his time in the Navy. I won't get into that right now, but
mm.
so the idea was planted way back in 2009
Oh, yeah,
for
wow.
us to team up on this novel.
Uh-huh.
It so happens that all I was writing was nonfiction, but all I was reading was fiction. Like I love reading crime
Mm.
novels, great mysteries, great thrillers. I love them. I just love
Yeah.
them. So I never thought I'd write one, but the circumstance was there. He had this seed of an idea that needed to get turned into a thriller, and we had an established writing partnership. And I happen to love crime novels, so we finally said after a decade, okay, let's do it. How is the process different? Hugely. I mean, the ABC thing I described.
Uh-huh.
I gather information, then I
Right.
work on my own, then we interact. Same process. So in that sense, it was the exact same writing process, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
What's so different is the experience and the discipline of writing a thriller, particularly, because like sometimes I say that thrillers are written for the reader. Nonfiction books are, now a memoir is all about the person you're writing about.
I see.
Thriller is really all about the reader. I say that because you can't let the thread drop for a second. Now, for me, a nonfiction book is like leading a tour of people, a group of people through a museum. Right?
I see.
Here's this room. Here's this exhibit. Everybody come this way. Come this way. Next room, next chapter. Now we're going in this exhibit. Now here's what's happening here. I explain it. And they go, that's interesting. Ask a few questions. Now, next room. It's all cool. It's a leisurely pace. It's easy. We can take a break for lunch. Not a problem. A thriller is like, I've got 6 people who are terrified on a cliff. I say, okay, you ready? Follow me. We are going to dash across this tightrope across the Grand Canyon.
Wow.
And it's a 460-page dash, and there's no break for lunch. There's no, okay, now we're going to go to the next chapter. There's no question period. It's like from moment to end, you can't let it drop for a second. And so it's hugely disciplined. I took out more words with this book than I've ever taken out. My first draft was 150,000 words. And our agent said, this is great, but you've got to get it down to 100,000. So we had to take out a third of what was in the page. I've never, had that kind of intense writing discipline. And what I learned in that was how much better something can get by making it tighter, leaner, more concentrated, more focused. It was just a fantastic experience. Very, very thrilling, actually, experience.
Wow, that's amazing. And like when you start writing, do you know where it's going? I mean, yeah.
Yes and no. Yes. And again, I've only written 2 so far. And one of them I'm, not quite finished, but mostly finished. So this is only my experience so far. But yes, by the time I start really drafting, I kind of know where it's going. But there's a lot about how we get there that I don't know. And there are a lot of surprises along the way that shock me. The book I'm writing right now, about 2/3 of the way through the book, there's this, I was sitting actually folding laundry one morning at 6:30 because I've been writing and thinking for a while and I was kind of stuck. So I got up and I did my version of taking a walk. I started folding some laundry and I said, oh, what if that happened? No, we can't do that. Oh yeah, we have to do that. And there's this thing that happens that's so shocking. I had no idea it was coming. And it's like, that is like the emotional turning point of the book for me. Wow. And I could never have come up with that in an outline. I never saw it coming. So I know what the final end is going to be, more or less. There's a serial killer in Steel Fear. Well, I knew who it was. Brandon and I both knew who it was from the start. But there's a lot we didn't know. So, yes and no. A lot of surprises happen.
Have you ever experienced exactly where you want to go with it, but then once you start writing, your writing kind of wants to take you this other way and you don't know if you should go with that or still kind of make sure it gets to this point? Yeah. Do you have any advice for what should you go with? I mean, there's no should probably, right?
Not exactly, but I think, so this will sound perhaps a little woo-woo, but my advice is that you have to follow the story. You need to let the story be the boss. And it can take a while, for me anyway, it can take a while to kind of figure out what the story is. Sometimes when I start, sometimes I don't exactly know what the story is. I don't quite know what the story, I have some ideas about it. I might know some of the practical circumstances of it. Like, okay, there's a person who died and there's this, we're in this, but sometimes you have to kind of work with it for a while before you really find out what is happening here, what the story is really all about. And sometimes the story kind of, like you're saying, it pulls you in a certain direction. It may not be the best way to go, but it's definitely worth following. Yeah, definitely worth considering. By the way, some teachers tell you, and one of my teachers tells me this, and I love this guy, and he's most of what he teaches is just so right on for me. But he teaches that before you start writing your novel, you kind of do a complete profile of your main characters. Mm. Like you spend weeks, months if you need to, writing all about them, making up stuff, asking yourself questions about how would they act in this circumstance and that. What did they eat? What were their traumas when they were a kid? Who do they love to listen to in their MP3? What I've found is that often I don't really know who these characters are until I've been writing them for a while. It's like I write him for a little bit, and then I go, I just realized this guy is a lot angrier than I thought he was.
Wow.
Or this person is a lot braver than I realized. And they start to take you in certain directions in the same way that the story does. So it's a balance of you are in charge, but at the same time, you have to listen to the story. The story has to be the boss. There was a scene I wrote in Steel Fear that I just loved. I think it was maybe my favorite scene in the story. And I had to take it out. I had to delete it. Like directors do this with movies all the time, right? I love the scene, but the story is the boss, and it didn't move the story forward. So, when you are at a fork in the road of any kind, my number one priority is, if I can let the story be the boss.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's great advice. That's like the simple bottom line you could always come back to.
Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, that's great. What do you think of, there's often advice for writers, at least starting out, to write what you know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think the opposite.
Interesting.
Because a lot of what I've done anyhow has been writing things I just don't know anything at all about. And here's a great example: Red Circle. I wrote this memoir for Brandon. When my agent contacted me and said, I got this Navy SEAL in my office who wants to write a memoir, and he's not a bad writer himself. He's pretty good, but he needs a real pro to work with. So my first thought was, what do I know about the life of a Navy SEAL? What do I know about the military? Nothing. My dad was in World War II, but I wasn't born yet. I don't know anything about them. No. So same thing. Steel Fear takes place on an aircraft carrier. It's right behind me. This is the Uss Abraham Lincoln, which Brandon actually served on in '96.
Wow.
And where the story actually takes place. I get to spend a day on this ship in 2019 when I was working on the manuscript.
Wow.
But when I started, I knew nothing about not just carriers, but the culture of people, these 6,000 people on this ship. And, so I had to go to school. And here's the cool thing about this. Like, my dad came from Germany. He was an immigrant, and he learned English as an immigrant. Well, something I learned from him is nobody loves the English language like somebody who came to it late in life.
Wow.
Like an immigrant, who learns it and appreciates it, because it's always has that kind of newness and fascination. When I wrote the Red Circle, Brandon's memoir, I had to learn everything about the military, and to be able to explain it to myself. So I was able to explain it to the reader in a way that they would get, no matter what their background.
Yes.
But I don't think I could have done it if I knew it really well.
Yeah.
So I think writing what you don't know and learning it while you're writing it,
you have to,
is a really cool adventure, and it's a really cool way to kind of grow yourself as a writer and as a person.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. That's so brilliant. Because you have a great point. Say you had all those experiences, that it wasn't something you had to research because you know it, you wouldn't necessarily be writing for a reader who doesn't know that at all.
Right.
That's a very good point. And that's true. You do read books like that. You do come across that occasionally where you're just kind of lost because it feels like, shoot, like I need to have this background.
Yeah. Right? I'm like outside looking in. Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I mean, there's lots of people, like, from Tom Clancy to Brad Thor, lots of people who know this stuff. Not Brad Thor, but lots of people who have lived it, therefore they write it, and they do an incredibly great job. Okay,
right,
fantastic. But Lee Child was never in the U.S. Army. He doesn't know the Army from firsthand experience. I mean, so yeah, I think writing what you don't know is the much wider, broader, more fruitful writer's journey.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that kind of, I mean, that could apply to not just writers, but actors as well.
Yeah.
Like everyone really, anyone
Oh, and
creative,
here's
it
the
really
thing,
does.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you such a great point about actors too, because what actors find, and writers can find this too, is that when you plunge into a world that is totally foreign and alien to you, as you learn it, as you write it, what you discover is those things that are common to humanity. So you
Yes.
find
Yes.
those
I
things that
always
you
say that.
totally get, you're
Yeah.
totally familiar with because they resonate with experiences you've had, even though you've never been in the military or you've never
Yes.
been a doctor or you've never been, whatever. And the same thing as an actor, you play Freddie Mercury and you're Rami Malek's. Like, what does he know about, but you find those touch points
Mm-hmm.
that resonate with you, whether it was something tragic or something hilarious or something, about love or something about disappointment. And that's kind of the beauty of being an actor. It's the beauty of being a writer. You
Mm-hmm.
find ways to bring your own experience to this foreign alien thing.
Right.
And that's what makes it go, nah.
Yes. Yes. Because no matter what, across every genre, everything, there's a universal truth that's there.
Yes,
And that
yes,
you could always hook into. Like the second you
yeah,
identify it, it hooks into you naturally. And
right,
then it's like, I got it. That's what
right.
this is.
And then it becomes
Yeah.
real.
Yes.
Yeah,
And then it's real. And then you also always have your imagination. And we could always like Sanford Meisner says, acting is living truthfully under imaginary circumstances.
right,
So, right,
right.
there you go. Right. You're just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
living this situation.
Yes.
I
Yeah, I
love
remember
that.
when I was a kid. I think it's maybe in that book somewhere. I remember reading. I read Born Free, a story about a lion, a woman who befriended a
Hmm.
lion, and then I read Old Yeller. Everyone knows Old Yeller, right?
Hmm.
And at the end of both of those books, the lion dies, the dog dies. When the lion died, I was like, oh, that's too bad. The lion died. When the dog died, I was a wreck. I
Hmm.
was just disconsolate I was like 8 years old or something like that, and I was just heartbroken. And it baffled me because that wasn't real. That was fiction. I knew it was fiction.
Hmm.
Old Yeller didn't really happen. It was a story. And the lion thing was real. It did happen,
Hmm.
but it didn't affect me emotionally at all. And I asked my mom about that. And she said, the thing about fiction is that it's not real, but it's realer than real. And I think that's exactly true. I think that those things, when you write an imaginary circumstance, and you find the truth that's in there, it's just like, it just resonates like
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, I love that story. Also, to even have that awareness at that age is so smart to ask your mom that, you know?
Give my mom credit for that. Yeah.
Yeah, like to realize though, how come this is affecting me and this doesn't? Like, very
Yeah.
interesting. That's
Yeah. I was
amazing.
curious about that.
Yeah, definitely. Did you have siblings as well or no?
I had an older brother and a younger brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering. So you're the middle one. I'm also the middle.
Yes, we are the forgotten middle children, aren't we?
Okay. I'm going to ask you a few just random fun
Oh boy.
questions, all right?
All right. I'll take a sip of tea.
Okay. Um, okay, I'll ask you this. What is your favorite question?
Maybe it's that. What is your favorite question? I guess my favorite question is, people say, what do you want your impact to be?
Mm.
And I always want to quote the epitaph on the gravestone at the end of the Royal Tenenbaums. Here lies Royal Tenenbaum, who died bravely saving his family in a terrible storm at sea, or something like that. It was totally made up, right? It was great, but it was made up, but it was true also
Mhm.
in a way. And my answer for that is just I want people to say he made a difference. I want to make a
Yes.
difference in people's lives.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's amazing. If you could be a professional athlete, what sport would you play?
Probably as a runner, probably long
Oh,
distance
okay.
running. Yeah,
Did
just
you
running.
run growing up or nothing at all? Like no
I was
running
I
experience?
wasn't super strong. I wasn't a super athlete, but I was a good runner.
Hmm.
And I probably if I developed the athletic side of my life, it would have been as a runner. And I just like the idea
Interesting.
of seeing a lot of scenery, running.
Yeah, I love that too. Isn't it crazy we have all these like other path like in a book, like in anything, right? There's all these other pathways that I guess could have happened.
Other
But then again,
possible
they also don't
universes.
exist. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, they don't,
Right.
but then again, they sort of do because you can imagine them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And then this podcast is called Behind the Now, but I love
Yes.
to focus on be the now. So what are some ways that you be the now? And that's up to your interpretation. So like you can ask me more if you don't understand this question.
You know, here's what's interesting about that for me is that I feel like the first, so I'm older than 50. I feel like for the first 50 years of my life, I was kind of missing my life.
Mm.
I felt like the first 50 years of my life, I was practicing being me, or something. And that most of the time, like moment to moment through most days, I was thinking about the future. I was very goal oriented, very achievement oriented. And yeah, to some extent regretting the past, but mostly very future oriented. And it feels like it's just been in the last 10 years or so that my greatest goals in life have been not something to be achieved in the future, but how I am every day, just how I am right now. Like my somebody asked me recently, what's your definition of success? And my definition of success, what did I say? It was living with someone you love, doing what you were put here to do, and doing it well. And that's just like, you can do that every day. I can do that every day. So I think that being in the now didn't have much reality to me for a lot of my life. And, and now it does. I'm a much happier person because it has reality every day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Is there anything that you can give credit to making that transition, or is it just an awareness, like, is there anything like any practices or no practices,
Yes.
whatever, however, yeah.
Yes.
What made you aware of it?
I think the first thing is having suffered through dismal failures. And having gone through, I've been through some tragic things and some difficult things and some terrible things. And I think through that, there was a certain sort of impetuous arrogance that I had, which has been a little bit tempered by time and circumstance, which has, just led me to be a little more circumspect. Writers like Eckhart Tolle and so forth. I mean, I've always had a philosophical bent. So I've always been fascinated with Zen and with all kinds of philosophical writings since I was a kid. But I think it took in my personal life a bunch of humbling experiences for all that to kind of get internalized and sink in and go, okay, you know what? And there's actually beauty in this, and there's joy in this, and there's achievement in this. Plus which I have to say, honestly, another big part of it is that I've been divorced twice. My first two marriages had their strong points. They produced lovely children, and they were part of what helped make me, but they were troubled and difficult and ended. And then I'm now in my third marriage, which is like heaven on earth. I mean, we're just best friends, and our life together is easy. It's just, there's difficulty in the world, but there's not difficulty in our world. So that, I think, is part of what makes now real for me, is that this now is pretty damn good. So
yeah, that's beautiful. I love hearing that. That's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
For all of you struggling lovelorns out there is somebody for you. I promise.
Yeah. And you know what?
Right
like
person.
everyone needs to go through. This is with everything, but in relationships too, you learn from each thing.
Yeah.
And like, it's timing. And there's just so many factors,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I went through relationships that ultimately didn't work. I went through careers that ultimately didn't fit me. And I think it took me half a century to kind of find the circumstances, the career, the partner that, all sort of kind of fit me better, which I'm just going to guess goes hand in hand with getting a better sense of who I really am.
Yes.
I mentioned the Joan Didion thing, right, to find out what I think. And, my version of that is I think we live to find out who we are. And for some people, they get that by the time they're 20 or by the time they're 10. For me, I'm a late bloomer, I guess.
That's amazing. How have you dealt with doubt in general? Like,
Wow. That's a good question, particularly in context of writing, because even though I've written a lot of books, I still, that happens not once, not twice, but, many times with every book. I sit down in the morning and I go, I don't know what I'm doing. That book was great, but this book is a mess.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And so that's where I experience probably more doubt than anywhere else. Not that I don't experience elsewhere, but I feel huge doubt there. And the way I deal with that is I take a big breath and I say, this is where faith comes in. Just, there is a story that wants to be told, and it's going to be me that tells it. It's going to happen. It's there. And I just I can't see it now, but it's self-talk. I've trained myself to talk to myself in a way that's kind and compassionate, and is also, I guess you could say, optimistic, but is based on the belief in a positive outcome.
Yeah,
and that's how I deal with it.
Yeah, and that's the bottom line of. I think that's how you have to deal with it, because it's the bottom line. Because you have your thoughts, which is creating how you feel often, and so once you identify, okay, well, that thought is making me feel this way, you change that. But yeah, that's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. And it's not like saying, you can do it, Johnny, you can do it, you can do it. Those things can feel so artificial and external, and just plus which there's a voice inside me saying, yeah, BS, So the whole put a smile on your face and keep a stiff upper lip and say, you can do it, Johnny. It's a more of an inner voice where you say, I am terrified right now, but you know what? So for example, I'll sit down and say, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'll hear myself say that, and I will take that and I will change it into, and I'll say, I don't know right now how this chapter ends or where it's going, but I can't wait to find out. And I'm going to find out.
Yeah. And and also surrendering sometimes to faith. You said faith, which is very, very true for all creative things. And in the creativity of it, but also in the bigger scope of it, like the business side of it, to have trust, really. Yeah.
It can be, and that can be hugely difficult, because no matter how fortunate and lucky and everything well-positioned you are, tomorrow something will come crashing down on your expectations, and you'll be facing it all over again. And it happens, I imagine, till you die. It's so you're always having to face unexpected disappointment and say, oh, okay, it's all good.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And ideally to also try not be attached to the external outcome all the time of what you're doing, which is hard. It's hard, but yeah.
Yes.
That's ideal.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's true. It is true.
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. You've given such gold, wow. And everyone must read your ebook. Actually, do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you, where to find your work? Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Okay. So the place where kind of my nexus, my little place where everything is put together, is my website, which is just my name, John David Mann, MANN, 2 N's, johndavidmann.com. And all my books are there, plus sample chapters of each book. You can get a taste of each book. My blog is there, where I share a lot of thoughts about sort of the process of being a human being, as well as the process of writing. If you hit the contact link and actually send a little email, it doesn't go to a staff. There is no staff. It goes to me. So I'll answer. I can't promise I'll be brilliant, but I can promise that I'll answer. And all my social media, links and channels are all there. And if you hit I think it's called free ebook, there's an ebook link on there, then you'll get the book that Jen is talking about.
Yes, which is amazing. And by the way, I'm also almost finished with the Latte Factor, which is amazing. Yeah, I have it right here.
Cool. Sweet. Love it. That's great. That was fun to write.
And the Go-Giver, I'm halfway in. And they're all amazing. So I'm really excited to keep reading your work.
Cool. Oh, that's so nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me know what you think after you've gone through and read the whole thing.
Okay, I will. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I really do.
Thank you.
You're amazing.
Likewise.
Thank you.